The cinnamon rolls burned somewhere in the food court, acrid smoke threading through the ventilation system like a warning. Sarah Chen didn't notice. She was counting again, the third time that evening, running her finger down the inventory log, cross-referencing supply orders against what actually arrived in the Cedar Creek Medical Clinic stockroom on the third floor of Rivercenter Mall in San Antonio. Bandages ordered, 240 boxes. Bandages received, 147. The missing 93 boxes weren't lost in shipping. She knew how to read a paper trail, and this one led somewhere dark. Her hands moved through the stock shelves with methodical precision, each gauze box aligned, each roll of medical tape squared into its slot like ammunition in a magazine. Military precision. 7 years of habit she couldn't shake even now, 3 years after the Army had decided Captain Sarah Chen was a liability rather than an asset. 3 years after the Hindu Kush. She pressed her palm flat against the cold stainless steel shelf and breathed once, slowly, the way she'd been trained. The way she'd learned to quiet her nervous system in rooms where shaking meant dying. The evening shift was hers alone, 6 p.m. to 2 a.m., 5 nights a week, which meant minimal supervision and maximum clarity. She could see the patterns without noise. She could watch the billing records cycle through the electronic system, each claim for treatment she hadn't performed, each insurance authorization for supplies that never materialized. $2,000 here. $4,000 there. Small enough to avoid immediate audit scrutiny. Large enough that someone was paying careful attention to the math. The folded flag sat in her locker downstairs, wrapped in a sealed plastic bag. Rodriguez's flag. The only physical proof that Captain Sarah Chen had ever existed, that she'd led 12 soldiers into the Sanjin Valley, that she'd carried 2 of them back through 8 miles of hostile territory with shrapnel embedded in her spine, that she'd lost Rodriguez to a sniper round that caught him mid-stride while she was 5 meters behind, unable to see, unable to save him. The Army had erased the operation from the records. They'd erased her commission, her service record, her official existence. They'd given her a new social security number, a new background, and a job application at a mall clinic, and they'd told her never to surface again. Working late again, I see. The voice came from behind her, smooth, practiced, carrying the particular confidence of a man accustomed to subordination. Dr. Kenneth Mercer stood in the clinic doorway, his tailored suit immaculate despite the mall's casual atmosphere, his shoes expensive leather that clicked against the tile with each measured step. Operations Director. Administrator. The kind of man whose business cards cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. She didn't turn immediately. She finished entering the last line item into the inventory notebook, the worn one she kept in her scrubs pocket, the one with the coffee stain on page 7 and the price of meticulous documentation written in every line. Evening shift requires evening work, Sarah said. Her voice came out soft, deferential. The voice she'd been trained to use here, the voice that belonged to the woman nobody noticed. Stock rotation doesn't complete itself. Mercer stepped closer, and the smell of his cologne, something expensive, something that spoke of boardrooms and decisions made in comfortable rooms, filled the narrow stockroom. He reached for her notebook with the casual entitlement of a man who'd never been told no. Sarah released it without resistance. Composure. Measured breathing. The submission was tactical. Remarkable attention to detail, he said, flipping through the pages with manicured fingers. His eyes moved across her handwriting, methodical, numbered, cross-referenced with dates and supply codes. The kind of documentation that military people kept. The kind that made certain men uncomfortable. Most nurses wouldn't bother with this level of precision. Accuracy saves lives, Sarah said. Flat. Professional. She didn't elaborate. She'd learned that silence was more powerful than explanation. Mercer smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He handed the notebook back with slow deliberation, the kind of movement designed to emphasize his authority. I wonder if all that attention is being directed toward the right priorities. Patient care, for instance, rather than administrative minutiae. There it was. The opening move. Not an accusation, not yet. Just a suggestion that her competence might be misaligned. just enough to establish that he'd noticed her noticing. Sarah took the notebook back and slipped it into her scrubs pocket, feeling the weight of it against her hip, the weight of truth he didn't want examined. Insurance fraud typically starts small, she said quietly. She wasn't looking at him. She was restocking the 4x4 gauze pads, her movements precise, economical. Billing for treatments never rendered. Inflating supply orders. It accumulates. Eventually someone notices. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that comes just before a dangerous conversation shifts directions. Mercer's breathing changed, slightly shallower, slightly faster. His hand moved to adjust his tie, a nervous gesture in a man designed to be unflappable. When he spoke again, his voice had hardened at its edges. You're paid to provide basic first aid to mall customers, Miss Chen. You're not paid to audit billing practices or question procurement decisions. Those fall well outside your purview. I know what my job is, Sarah said. She turned to face him then, and something in her eyes, something that flickered just for an instant, something that hinted at a woman who'd assessed threat levels in darker places than fluorescent-lit starkrooms, made him take half a step back. She pulled her gaze away immediately. The mask slipped back into place. I was just making an observation. Well, don't. Mercer's voice had become clinical, the voice of a man calculating consequences. Your observations are creating unnecessary complications. I'd hate to see your employment here jeopardized by our miscommunications about scope of practice. He left without waiting for a response, his expensive shoes clicking against the tile in a rhythm like a countdown. Sarah waited until the sound faded completely before she permitted herself to move. She counted her breaths, in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. The old technique. The one that kept soldiers alive in moments that demanded absolute control. The mall around her continued its evening rhythm. Shoppers on the floors below, browsing stores that stayed open until 9 p.m., walking past the sporting goods outlet where a young Marine stood near the climbing wall section, running his fingers over a pair of tactical boots. He had the bearing of the service, the specific posture of someone trained to carry weight, the particular awareness of exits and sight lines that soldiers never entirely shook off. His left forearm, visible below his rolled sleeve, carried a tattoo. A name. 2 words in precise military lettering, Captain Chen. He didn't recognize her. The nurse in the clinical white coat 3 floors above in the stockroom was nothing like the officer who'd found him half buried under debris in the Sanjin Valley, nothing like the captain who'd cut him free with combat efficiency and carried him through 8 miles of hostile territory with his arm across her shoulders and her voice steady in the darkness, telling him to focus on her breathing, to match his rhythm to hers, to stay with her because she wasn't losing him to a mountain that thought it could take Americans. He was supposed to be dead 3 years ago. She was supposed to be erased. Sarah packed the inventory notebook carefully, logged the evening's findings into the electronic system with the same meticulous precision she'd applied to every task for the past 36 months, and locked the stockroom door. The fluorescent lights hummed above her, a sound like electricity burning, like machines that never rested. She descended the service stairwell, avoiding the main corridors, moving with the practiced invisibility of someone trained to move through crowds without being seen. The mall's evening sound surrounded her, the carousel music from the children's area, distant laughter, the rush of water from the central fountain in the atrium. The ordinary sounds of ordinary life, the normal world she'd been ordered to inhabit. She passed the sporting goods store without looking in, but her peripheral vision caught him anyway, the young Marine with her name on his arm, selecting boots he didn't need, living a civilian life she'd paid for with 7 years of service in places where sunrise meant counting the living. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that she could feel the investigation beginning before it had even started, could feel Mercer already activating his network, already making calculations, already deciding what needed to disappear. And she was going to have to let it happen. Because if she fought back, if she surfaced, if she admitted she knew things that shouldn't be knowable to a mall clinic nurse, then the army would know she'd broken the erasure protocol. And the erasure was supposed to protect everyone. Dr. Mercer's voice came before he did. Sarah heard it carrying down the clinic corridor like a tank idling in a garage, low, authoritative, designed to make everyone within earshot understand that someone was about to be publicly dismantled. She was suturing the laceration on Mrs. Yamamoto's grandson, a clean cut from a skateboard accident, the boy's arm steady under her hands because she'd talked him through the procedure the way she'd been trained to talk people through trauma. The needle went in with the precision of someone who'd done this 10,000 times, not 10. 1 stitch. 2 stitches. The boy's grandmother sat in the plastic chair beside the bed, nodding approval. Then the door pushed open hard enough to rattle the examination light. Dr. Mercer stood in the doorway with 2 security guards flanking him like he'd summoned them for theater, and his eyes locked on Sarah's hand still moving through the suture line. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," he said, loud enough for the waiting room to hear. "Unauthorized treatment protocols. Acting like you're running a trauma center instead of a mall clinic." He stepped into the room, his presence taking up space the way men like him always did, shoulders back, chin forward, the kind of bearing that mistook volume for authority. "Who authorized you to use surgical sutures on a minor? We use butterfly strips here, Nurse Chen, or did your mysterious training program skip the part about scope of practice?" The words landed like stones in still water. Sarah's hands didn't pause. The needle moved through flesh and back, steady as a laser, her breathing unchanged. 1 measured breath in. 1 measured breath out. Mrs. Yamamoto spoke up, her voice thin with age but firm. She was very professional. "Very gentle with my grandson. I appreciate." Mercer cut her off without looking at her. "I apologize that our Florence Nightingale here thinks she's too qualified for basic first aid." He picked up Sarah's suture kit, the good one, the one she'd brought from home because the clinic supplies were garbage, and held it like evidence. "This isn't a trauma bay. These are protocols for a reason." Sarah tied off the final stitch. Clipped the thread. Examined her work. Perfect approximation, minimal scarring, the kind of closure that would heal clean because she understood the geometry of human tissue the way other people understood directions. She pressed a clean gauze pad over the site and looked up at Dr. Mercer's face, taking in his expression the way a sniper reads wind patterns. His satisfaction was already there, already complete. He wasn't looking for an answer. He was looking for breakdown. A single tear escaped her left eye. It surprised her, not the tear itself, but that it had broken through her composure at all. She wiped it away without breaking eye contact, her jaw clenching once, hard, and then releasing. When she spoke, her voice was quiet steel laid across a stone foundation. "You're making a mistake you'll regret." Mercer smiled like he'd won something. "Is that a threat, clipboard commando?" Sarah said nothing. Mrs. Yamamoto's grandson watched her face, reading something in it that made him sit very still. The security guard shifted weight, uncertain if they were supposed to do something. Sarah finished dressing the wound, applied the antibiotic ointment with a nurse's care, and stepped back from the examination table. "He can go home. No heavy lifting for 3 days. Change the dressing tomorrow and keep it dry." Her eyes moved to Mrs. Yamamoto. "You did the right thing bringing him in immediately." Mercer left the room still holding her suture kit, and she didn't ask for it back. The break room exclusion began on Monday and perfected itself by Friday. Sarah entered at 12:19 p.m. on Monday. She'd started timing the moments to avoid maximum exposure, and found Jenny there, half through her lunch, a plastic container of leftover pad thai open on the table. Jenny looked up. Looked at Sarah. Then looked at her phone, stood without speaking, grabbed her container, and left through the back door that led to the loading dock. 2 minutes later, Sarah was alone at a table made for 5, her own sandwich on a paper napkin, her notebook open to a page of inventory comparisons. 47 missing for bags this month. 312 missing alcohol prep pads. Charting codes for medications that never left the pharmacy. The numbers told a story if you had the training to read them, and Sarah had spent 3 years trying not to read it. But the billing fraud was intricate enough that ignoring it felt like complicity, and complicity was a hole that kept getting deeper. She'd tried the quiet route first, mentioning the irregularities to Mercer, and watching his jaw tighten had been enough. He knew she knew. And now he was making sure everyone else knew that she knew, which was its own form of erasure. By Wednesday, the pattern was mechanical. Marcus would grab his lunch and leave when she entered. Priya, sweet Priya, who taught Sarah how to make proper Thai curry and had brought her handmade gift tags at Christmas, wouldn't make eye contact anymore. The air in the break room changed when Sarah sat down, like a room full of people collectively holding their breath. She ate alone. She wrote her numbers alone. She became a thing the clinic had decided to ostracize, which was exactly what Mercer wanted because isolation was easier to control than confrontation. But that wasn't the worst part. On Friday afternoon, Sarah arrived for her shift and found the disciplinary notice posted on the staff board in the main hallway where patients had to walk past it to get to the waiting room. Red paper. Her full name in bold. Sarah Chen, written warning for repeated insubordination, poor clinical judgment, and failure to follow chain of command. The notice detailed nothing specific, no date, no incident, no actual protocol violation, which meant it was pure theater. Mercer had weaponized ambiguity the way experienced administrators do when they want to make someone radioactive without giving them anything concrete to defend against. He was standing beside it when she arrived, arms crossed, waiting. 2 patients sat in the waiting room, and he'd timed her arrival perfectly so she'd have to read it while they watched. When someone thinks they're above the rules, he announced to the room, to the patients, to the universe, everyone suffers. Sarah read every word of the notice. Took in the red paper, the careful calligraphy of official condemnation, the date that didn't match any actual incident. Her hands were still. Her breathing was controlled. She turned to Mercer and spoke quietly enough that only he could hear. The truth always surfaces, Dr. Mercer. He leaned close, his voice dropped to something almost intimate. Not if it's buried deep enough. She walked past him, past the notice, and didn't look back. Her reflection caught in the glass case displaying the mall directory as she moved down the hallway, a pale ghost of a woman, her clinic badge catching the fluorescent light. She looked like someone being erased. Which, she supposed, was the entire point. 3 floors below the clinic, the Apple Store's air conditioning hummed at a steady 71 degrees. A young Marine in civilian clothes, dark hair, broad shoulders, the bearing of someone who'd been trained to take orders and carry weight, was examining a new iPad, his father beside him. Harold Vickers was 74 years old, silver-haired, moving with the careful precision of a man whose body had started keeping score. The Marine kept glancing at him with the kind of attention that came from deep family history. They were close. The kind of close that came from having already survived loss together. Neither of them knew that 50 yards above them, a woman was reading her own public condemnation. Neither of them knew that the woman they were both looking for, though neither of them had consciously set out to look, was standing in a corridor exactly parallel to their position, her reflection ghosting across glass while their shadows moved beneath mall track lighting below. The Marine absently touched the tattoo on his inside forearm, hidden under his sleeve. Captain Chen. Hindu Kush. 2021, the name of a ghost. The name of someone who'd saved his life and then disappeared from official records, from memory banks, from every system designed to track human existence. He'd spent 3 years wondering if she was real. She was wondering the same thing about herself. The food court of Rivercenter Mall hummed with the ordinary percussion of Thursday afternoon, children shrieking near the fountain, the metallic rattle of a closing storefront gate, the perpetual beeping of the pretzel stand timer. Sarah was restocking the clinic's oxygen tanks when the fountain went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that only happens when a human body stops behaving like one. She was moving before her brain finished processing. The elderly man was on the marble tiles, his left hand clutching his chest like something inside was trying to escape. His mouth opened and closed without sound. Children scattered like startled birds, and the crowd that had been taking selfies by the water feature now stood frozen, phones hanging useless at their sides, mall security 30 yards away scanning the escalators. Sarah dropped to her knees beside him, her fingers already reading his neck, carotid artery, thready, irregular. His skin was the color of cold concrete. "What's your name?" Her voice was steady, clipped. Medical assessment only. Harold. Harold Vickers. I can't, my chest, I can't. You're in cardiac distress, Harold. I'm a medical professional. I need you to try to relax. The lie tasted like copper and muscle memory. She'd told herself 3 years ago that nobody would ever need what was buried inside her training. 3 years was apparently a short timer on that promise. His left eye was already starting to droop. The carotid read like a guitar string about to snap. A mall security guard jogged over, radio already in hand. We have medical staff. Where? Sarah didn't look up. She was already pulling her jacket open, already reaching for her bag with her left hand while her right stayed on Harold's carotid. Her bag, the one she carried everywhere, the one Mercer had once asked about when he saw her reach for a trauma shear during inventory, the one she'd said was just for personal supplies, contained exactly what it always contained. Exactly what she'd sworn 3 years ago she'd never use again. Harold's body convulsed once. His eyes rolled back. The arrhythmia she'd been reading against her fingertips suddenly wasn't there at all. Flat line. The crowd sound shifted from murmurs to gasps, and Sarah felt the world compress into a single point of focus, just like every time before, just like the mountains, just like the metal table in the forward aid station where Captain Sarah Chen used to be a person with a name. She was already pushing him onto his back, already clearing the space around him, her fingers finding the fourth intercostal space with the precision of a compass finding north. She couldn't do CPR on a man whose ribs would shatter under the pressure and whose heart was too compromised to beat under her hands alone. She'd seen that equation before. In the HK province south of Kost. In the dark. The folding knife came out of her bag in one fluid motion. A Kershaw leak, blade length 1.8 inches, sharp enough to split a hair and sharp enough for the thing she was about to do. The crowd made a sound like a single animal waking up. Call 911. She didn't yell. She didn't have to. Tell them ETA now. Cardiac arrest requires level 1 trauma. Tell them to prepare a defibrillator. Prepare chest tube supplies. A woman with purple nail polish was already talking into her phone, her voice shaking. Another man had turned away, couldn't watch. Someone was filming, of course someone was filming, and Sarah registered the red light of the phone's camera with the part of her brain that had learned to file away evidence 3 years ago, that had learned to fear documentation. She couldn't think about that now. Harold Vickers was dead, and she was the only person in this food court who knew how to fix it. The blade found the intercostal space like a key finding its lock. The resistance was always different than you'd expect. Cartilage has its own density, bone its own song. 2 inches. 3 inches. The sternum was moving through her hand now, feeling like she was carving through the architecture of the world. Blood came, not a fountain, controlled, dark as old wine, and the smell of it triggered something in her chest that had no name anymore, just a pressure and a clarity that made everything else disappear. Her right hand was inside now, the incision large enough for her fingers, and she was reading the internal cavity with the sensitivity of a safecracker's touch. Left lung, deflated but intact. Heart, there, the flaccid useless muscle, cool and still. She'd done this before. In the mountains. On Sergeant Marcus Webb, who'd taken shrapnel from an IED and was bleeding out with his family back in Raleigh who would never know a thing about it. Webb had lived. Harold was going to live. Push 1 epi, 4. She didn't know if paramedics were here yet. She didn't care. Tell me when it's in. A voice, one of the security guards, actually moving now, actually useful, it's in. Pushing now. Sarah's left hand was steady as a surgical laser while her right hand manually massaged the heart, squeezing in a careful rhythm, pump, release, forcing blood through the coronary arteries because his own heart had given up the job. The knife was still in her right hand, underneath the heart, ready for the next phase if this didn't work. Resuscitative hysterotomy if he crashed again. She'd done that too. Once. The patient's name was Ramirez, and he'd come back to consciousness screaming and asking for his mother in Spanish. 2 minutes, she said. To nobody. To the God she'd stopped believing in. Come on. 2 minutes. The paramedics were there. 2 of them, a man with salt and pepper hair and a woman barely 30, both moving like they'd done this 100 times and never once like this. The older paramedic's face went through 6 different emotions in sequence when he saw her hand inside the chest cavity. What in God's name? Asystole on arrival. For minutes estimated downtime. I have manually restored perfusion pressure until you can defibrillate. He's been epinephrine positive at 1 minute. The older paramedic didn't ask questions. He was already pulling the portable defibrillator, already shouting to his partner. Clear the field. Let's get pads on. Sarah withdrew her hand, and the young paramedic was there with gauze, with trauma dressing, moving with a kind of practiced efficiency that meant military background. Army, probably. Maybe Navy. Where'd you train? That was field surgery. Sarah didn't answer. She was watching Harold's chest, watching the rhythm on the monitor. Asystole still, the flat line that meant death was still winning. The defibrillator hummed like something waking up. Charging. Charged. Clear. Harold's body arched off the ground like a puppet on strings, and Sarah saw it, the miracle that never got easier to watch, the heart's rhythm flickering, catching, finding itself again. Sinus rhythm. Slow at first, fragile, like a bird that forgot how to fly and was remembering again. The young Marine was standing 12 feet away, half hidden behind a potted palm. Sarah saw him the way a deer sees a hunter, peripheral, motion-based, unfiltered. He was staring at her hands. At the blood on her arms up to the elbows. At the scar tissue visible on her forearms, the kind of scarring that only came from years of combat medicine in places where anesthesia was a luxury item. His left hand was unconsciously touching his own forearm, and Sarah knew, with the certainty of someone who'd spent 3 years trying not to know, that her name was tattooed there. That his face was the one she'd pulled out of the rubble stack at FOB Shank, the one whose blood had soaked through her sleeves while she ran 2 miles through a pass, while her unit's call sign was being whispered into radios like a prayer. The paramedics were moving Harold onto the stretcher, were setting up for transport, were already radioing ahead to Cedar Creek's trauma bay. The older paramedic looked at Sarah with something that might have been recognition or might have been shock. You need to come with us. You're a witness. Material witness to his condition on arrival. I'll follow in my own vehicle. I don't think you understand. But Sarah was already walking. The crowd parted for her like she was someone they recognized from a nightmare. Phones were still filming. The food court smelled like copper and humanity and the kind of fear that doesn't wash out of fabric. She could hear radio chatter, mall security calling upstairs to the clinic, to Dr. Mercer's office, reporting the situation, the crowd, the voice that came back through the radio made her shoulders tense, detain her. Nobody performs surgery in my facility without authorization. I want that woman detained until I arrive. Sarah didn't run. Running would have been a confession. Instead, she walked toward the clinic with the steady pace of someone going to her shift change, and the crowd, 200 people who'd watched her reach into a man's chest and pull him back from death, parted and whispered and filmed and didn't move to stop her. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and failure. Sarah washed her hands methodically, the water running copper-red down the drain, watching her own scars surface on her skin like something trying to escape. She dried each finger carefully, each palm. The muscle memory in her hands was singing. The part of her that she'd buried 3 years ago was screaming that it was alive. That it had never been buried at all, just waiting for permission. Dr. Mercer arrived 14 minutes later with Dr. Patricia Hammond from the hospital's credentials committee and a man in a suit who carried a termination letter like it was a sermon. His face had the kind of rigid anger that meant he'd already made his calls, already activated his network, already decided how the story would end. You performed surgery without a license, he said. Just like that. As if the man's heart wasn't beating right now because her hands had squeezed it. As if the crowd hadn't filmed his resurrection. As if Harold Vickers wasn't alive. Sarah sat in the plastic chair and folded her hands on the desk, right over left, the scars visible, the calluses from weapons handling visible, everything visible. Her voice when she spoke was calm. Measured. The voice of someone who'd spent 3 years learning to control every possible vibration. That man would be dead otherwise. Mercer smiled. It was not a smile that meant humor. That man's family is going to own this mall by Friday. They're going to own us. And you're going to disappear. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out. The ones who've seen the worst often give the most. Within the hour, Dr. Mercer's phone was already moving. He called the mall ownership group's board members, 3 of them, all men with portfolios heavier than conscience. He didn't ask about Sarah's credentials. He stated conclusions. We have a liability catastrophe, he said into his cell phone in the privacy of his office. A nurse with falsified medical training performed an unauthorized surgical procedure on a patient in public view. I've already initiated her termination. The board members didn't ask questions. They never did. Mercer had learned long ago that power moves faster when you frame the narrative before anyone else can. Then he called his consultant, a man named Richard Hayes, a physician with a license held together by 3 lawsuits and Mercer's personal retainer. Hayes specialized in credential reviews that found exactly what his employers needed found. Within 40 minutes, Hayes arrived at the mall clinic with a briefcase and a smile that never reached his eyes. He examined Sarah's employment file, her references, her certifications. Every one of them fabricated by the Army's cover operation 3 years ago, pristine falsifications, perfect backstopping, the kind of work only a government agency could produce. But Hayes didn't care about verification. He cared about narrative construction. These credentials are inconsistent with her clinical performance, Hayes said, not looking up from the file. His voice was smooth, practiced, the kind of voice that had ended careers in depositions. I'm finding significant gaps. Unusual medical knowledge for someone with her background. I'd recommend immediate termination based on fraud alone. Mercer nodded. This was the architecture of it all, not truth, but plausible destruction. By 3 p.m., Hayes had written his report. By 5 p.m., Mercer had it in the board members' inboxes. By 6:56 p.m., Sarah's phone rang. You're terminated effective immediately, the HR director said, her voice hollow through the speaker. No explanation beyond the paper. Practicing outside scope of authorization. Endangering patient safety. We'll mail your final check. Please return your credentials and badge by end of business tomorrow. The line went dead. Sarah sat in her apartment above the laundromat on Flores Street, the flag from Rodriguez folded in her lap, the phone still in her hand. 200 witnesses. 200 cameras. A man's heartbeat restored in her palms. And it didn't matter. The system that had erased her 3 years ago was now using her own heroism as the weapon to erase her again. She'd violated her orders by revealing that level of training. She'd surfaced when she was supposed to stay invisible. And now she was going to pay for it. The next morning, she walked into the mall at 9 a.m. through the loading dock entrance, past the delivery trucks and the smell of garbage mixed with diesel exhaust. The employee exit was where they'd told her to return her scrubs, the laundry bin behind the facility office, the one that smelled like industrial detergent and broken things. Sarah opened her locker for the last time. 10 years of shifts condensed into this moment. She removed her badge with the faded picture of herself from 6 months ago, still trying to look like a nurse. She removed the notebook where she'd documented every inventory discrepancy, every fraudulent billing entry, evidence she'd been collecting in case she ever needed proof that Mercer was corrupt. She handed it all to the security guard, Marcus, the one who'd given her good shifts and never asked questions. He wouldn't meet her eyes. Through the break room window 3 floors up, she could see Jenny and another staff nurse watching. They looked away when Sarah glanced up. The politics of survival. Don't associate with the terminated. Don't look like you knew her. The price of loyalty was visibility, and visibility was a luxury neither of them could afford. Sarah folded her clinic scrubs one final time. Pale blue fabric, worn soft from 97 nights of wear. This uniform had been her armor, the disguise that let her disappear into the machinery of civilian life. Now it was just scraps. She placed the folded bundle in the laundry bin and closed the metal lid. The click echoed in the concrete corridor like a door shutting on someone else's life. She walked out through the loading dock in street clothes, jeans, a grey hoodie pulled up against the autumn air that had turned cold without warning. Her bag contained everything that mattered, a wallet, her phone, the folded flag of her teammate Rodriguez still pristine after 3 years. The parking garage was all fluorescent buzz and reflected light, concrete columns rising like a monument to transit and abandonment. Her Honda Civic waited in employee section E, 10 years old, reliable, forgettable. She sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. Her phone had 63 messages. News outlets. Lawyers. People who'd filmed the thoracotomy and wanted to know if she'd serve as an expert witness. A woman who claimed her daughter had been saved by someone matching Sarah's description. A man named Webb who'd left a voicemail in a voice like gravel being poured. Captain, this is Marcus Webb from Mall Security. I'm also former Marine Corps, and I wanted you to know I saw what happened out there, and I'm documenting everything Mercer's done in that clinic. You're not alone in this. I'm working on it. Marcus Webb. The IT technician who pushed a cart through the mall every evening. A prosthetic leg visible when he wore shorts. A Marine. But the only call that mattered was the one that didn't come. The Army liaison who'd ordered her to disappear 3 years ago. The one who'd told her, your identity is classified. You never existed. If you surface, if you're identified, the entire operation is compromised. She'd violated that order by performing procedures only a combat medic could perform, in front of 200 cameras, with her name tattooed on a dead Marine's son's forearm. She didn't know if they were coming for her or simply preparing to erase her all over again. 3 floors up, in his office, Mercer was moving. His hands moved across his keyboard with the precision of someone who'd done this before. The food court security footage from the thoracotomy, deleted. The personnel file access logs showing how closely Sarah had reviewed the billing records, deleted. The email thread with the board members about managing the Chen situation, deleted. The invoice discrepancies themselves, flagged and scheduled for permanent removal. He was confident. He'd covered tracks in 3 hospitals before this one. People disappeared all the time. You just had to move fast and make the right calls to the right people. This would be over by week's end. What Mercer didn't know was that Marcus Webb had spent 6 years as a network systems administrator before his leg was blown off by an IED in Sanjian Valley. Webb knew every server in the mall's infrastructure the way a sniper knows the landscape. He'd installed a secondary backup 5 months ago, a precaution against the kind of data loss that hospitals always experienced. Every email Mercer sent, every file he deleted, every keystroke he made, Webb's secondary server was capturing it all, spooling the data like a tape recorder running in the background. Webb burned everything to a hard drive at 8:19 a.m. Then he made 2 calls. The first to the military police detachment at Fort Sam Houston. The second to the FBI field office in San Antonio. I'm former Marine Corps, Webb said, his voice steady. I have evidence of insurance fraud, federal facility sabotage, and obstruction of an investigation involving an Army officer. I'll send the data now. Meanwhile, in Cedar Creek Medical, in a private room with a cardiac monitor still beeping its steady rhythm, General Harold Vickers was waking up. His son David sat beside the hospital bed, hadn't left since yesterday. The general's eyes opened slowly, the morphine still soft in his system. Dad, David said, squeezing his father's hand. You're okay. You collapsed at the mall. A nurse saved your life. What kind of nurse? The general asked, his voice hoarse. That's the thing, David said. There was something about the way she moved. The way she handled the trauma. I've seen that before. He pulled his forearm into the light. The tattoo was visible now, clear, a name in military script. Captain Chen, David whispered. Hindu Kush 2021. That was the only confirmed kill save I ever got. The only one I actually remember being carried out of. The only one I never forgot. The general's eyes widened. He said nothing. But his hand gripped his son's wrist like a man drowning. The mall's glass doors slid open at 10 a.m. sharp, and Sarah Chen walked through them like a woman entering a tomb. The morning light hit the polished floors and threw everything into crystalline clarity, the fountain still running, the same benches, the same rhythm of early shoppers who had no idea what had happened here 36 hours ago. Her final paycheck was in an envelope somewhere in Dr. Mercer's office. She'd come to collect it. That was all. She told herself this as she moved through the corridor, her footsteps echoing off tile with a sound like distant gunfire. The clinic doors were propped open. Security stood inside. Two men in uniforms she didn't recognize at first, then recognized immediately, military police. The waiting room was chaos. Chairs overturned. Patient files scattered across the floor like confetti after a riot. And sitting rigid in the corner, a man with dark eyes and a scar running from his left temple to his jaw, staring directly at her. His mouth opened. The words came in Pashto, rapid fire, a language Sarah had not heard spoken since the mountains. Malaikati Kush. Malaikati Kush. Angel of the Kush. Angel of the Kush. He was standing now, moving toward her with the jerking gait of a man whose left leg didn't quite obey him, and Sarah's entire body locked down like a vault door slamming shut. She did not step back. She did not flinch. The training took over, the part of her that had learned to absorb shock and process threat data in microseconds. You saved my unit. After ambush. You carried Hassan through the snow. His English was broken, each word an effort, but the meaning came through clear as rifle fire. Mountain pass. 3 kilometers. Enemy fire all around. You were alone. You carried 2 men at once. His voice cracked. Everyone thought we were dead. Then you came. You carried us out. Security moved to physically remove him, but Sarah raised a single hand and the men froze, not because she had authority, but because something in her posture suggested that disobeying would be catastrophic. She looked at the interpreter, this man with his scarred face and his shaking hands, and said nothing. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then he started crying. My whole unit knows. We all know. You are legend. In every phi base from Sanjin to Loga, they tell stories about you. But you disappeared. We thought you died. Behind Sarah, a voice said, That's impossible. General Harold Vickers stood in the doorway of the examination room, his hospital gown replaced with khakis and a light blue polo shirt, his face the color of old paper. His hand reached out and gripped his son's arm, David Vickers, the young Marine with the tattoo, with a kind of force that made David wince. The general's eyes locked on Sarah with the precision of targeting equipment. Show me the citation. Now. David Vickers fumbled for his wallet. His hands were shaking. The wallet was brown leather, worn soft from years of carrying, and when he pulled it open, a folded piece of paper emerged that looked like it had been unfolded and refolded 10,000 times. He handed it to his father without speaking. General Vickers unfolded it. His jaw tightened. He began reading aloud, his voice steady as a metronome, each word striking like a gavel, for extraordinary valor in combat operations in the Hindu Kush mountain region during Operation Enduring Freedom. An unnamed Army Ranger captain, call sign Nightfall, under sustained hostile fire, performed a solo extraction of 12 wounded Marines and 4 civilian interpreters across 6 miles of mountainous terrain. Captain Nightfall coordinated air support while manually carrying 2 critically wounded personnel simultaneously, navigating through enemy ambush positions and establishing a secure perimeter until extraction arrived. Despite injuries sustained during the operation, Captain Nightfall refused medical evacuation until all personnel were secured. Distinguished Service Cross. presented posthumously per military records, December 2021. The room went so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing like trapped wasps. This is fantasy, Mercer burst from his office, his face mottled with rage. This woman is a mall clinic nurse with a psychiatric history. There is no military record, no operation, nothing but a delusional woman and a man with a traumatic brain injury constructing false narratives. We have the computer records, someone said behind Sarah. Marcus Webb stepped forward. The mall's IT technician. A Marine Corps veteran himself, according to the tattoo on his neck, a small devil dog silhouette. He was holding a laptop and a hard drive the size of a brick. His voice was quiet. Clinical. The voice of a man delivering a bomb threat to the morning news. I'm Marcus Webb, IT technician, this facility. Dr. Mercer spent last evening deleting security footage, personnel files, email correspondence. I maintained a backup server. Everything he deleted is here. He connected the laptop to the clinic's monitor. The screen flickered to life. There was Mercer's email chain. There was his voice on an embedded video recording, instructing Jenny Martinez to lose medication logs and falsified treatment records. There were spreadsheets documenting $340,000 in phantom insurance claims spanning 18 months. There was video of him accessing Sarah's fabricated personnel file and calling Cedar Creek Medical to confirm her credentials don't exist. The smoking gun was the email to 3 hospital board members. We need to eliminate the Chen problem before she notices the billing discrepancies. Not address her concerns. Not investigate. Eliminate. The military police officers moved on Mercer simultaneously. One of them was reading him rights before his mouth finished forming the word setup. The other was calling for backup. Mercer's expensive suit, that had to be $3,000, Sarah thought distantly, wrinkled as he was cuffed, and his protests became white noise against the sound of his own destruction. But that wasn't the worst part for him. The worst part came when Marcus continued scrolling through the files, revealing not just Mercer's crimes but the crimes of the 3 hospital board members who'd been helping him, the contractor who'd provided inflated supply orders, the insurance adjusters he'd paid off. A web of corruption that went up and out and sideways, touching 12 different institutions and 17 different people. The phone in Agent Torres's hand rang continuously. By the time Mercer was being led toward the exit in handcuffs, 3 other agencies had been briefed. Sarah stood motionless in the center of the clinic as the chaos unfolded around her like a storm with her at its eye. She did not speak. She did not move. Her hands remained at her sides, steady as surgical steel, while men and women in uniforms questioned witnesses and photographed evidence, and Marcus Webb typed commands that revealed layer after layer of systematic fraud. The interpreter, the one called Farron, she knew his name now, remembered his voice in the mountains, kept looking at her with an expression like devotion. General Vickers approached. He was moving carefully, favoring his left side where the thoracotomy had been performed, where her hands had cracked his ribs and found his heart in the dark. He extended his hand. Captain Chen. Sarah looked at his hand. Then she took it. His grip was strong. A commander's grip. A man's grip. The kind that held power and respect and the weight of command decisions. General Vickers, she said. Her voice was different now. The nurse's deferential tone was gone. This was the voice of a captain speaking to a general, respectful, but level. Peer to peer. My son says you carried him through 6 kilometers of hostile terrain with a bullet in your shoulder. He was the only one of the 12 I carried twice, Sarah said. His wound was the worst. David Vickers stepped forward and pulled up his sleeve. The tattoo was there, her name, Sarah, in the block letters of military ink, done by someone who'd made mistakes but committed anyway. I got this because I knew you saved me. I didn't remember your face, but I remembered that you were real. My therapist said I was creating false memories. My father said I was hallucinating. But I knew. Every time I looked at your name on my arm, I knew. Sarah looked at the tattoo for a long time. Your shoulder healed well, she said finally. I'm a Marine, he said, and almost smiled. By evening, the story was everywhere. Local news crews had arrived by noon. National networks picked it up by 2 p.m. Decorated Army Ranger working as mall clinic nurse exposed by hero rescue. Mall director fired decorated veteran to hide fraud scheme. Captain Sarah Chen, the legend whose name saved lives. By 6 p.m., the hashtag was trending. By midnight, the Department of Defense had declassified her entire operation file and released a statement that Captain Sarah Chen was being reinstated with full rank, back pay for 3 years, and a formal public apology from the Army Chief of Staff for the protective status that had erased her. Dr. Kenneth Mercer was charged with insurance fraud, falsification of medical records, attempted destruction of evidence, and witness intimidation. His criminal processing would take days, but by the time the sun set on San Antonio that night, his career had been incinerated. The hospital board members were being investigated. The insurance adjusters were lawyering up. The contractor was cooperating with federal authorities. The web he'd helped with had caught him instead. Sarah stood in the food court where she'd performed the thoracotomy 36 hours earlier, now surrounded by Marines. David Vickers' entire unit had shown up, 8 men and women who heard the story and drove from Fort Hood to meet the legend. They formed a circle around her without speaking. One by one, they saluted. The gesture moved through the group like a wave, and Sarah's hand came up to return each salute with the precision of 3 years' training reasserting itself. Agent Torres approached with paperwork. Captain, Washington wants to reinstate you with full rank and back pay. Public ceremony at the Pentagon. The operation is declassified as of this morning. Sarah's hand touched the folded flag in her bag. Rodriguez's face in her memory. The young interpreter's face. The faces of the 12 she'd carried. What about the ones who didn't make it, she asked. Torres nodded. They'll be honored too. All of them. The TV in the food court showed Mercer being led through the mall corridor in handcuffs, his expensive suit rumpled, his face the color of ash. Photographers shouted questions he wouldn't answer. His lawyer was already talking about appeals. His network was already dissolving. The power that had seemed so absolute 24 hours ago had evaporated like rain on hot asphalt. Sarah accepted a phone call from the Army Chief of Staff personally apologizing for forcing her underground and offering her a position training combat medics at Fort Sam Houston. She said yes. She said nothing else. When she hung up, David Vickers was watching her, trying to reconcile the person in front of him with the legend he'd carried as a name on his arm. I finally recognize you, he said quietly. I know, Sarah replied. 3 weeks later, San Antonio would host a public ceremony where the thoracotomy happened, where the fountain still ran and the benches still existed and the world had learned what it meant to have a hero standing invisibly in your midst. But tonight, in the food court as the evening crowd thinned and the security teams completed their final sweeps, Sarah Chen stood in the light and let herself be seen. Not as a nurse. Not as the woman they'd tried to destroy. As what she had always been, the soldier who had nothing left to hide. Subscribe to witness more stories of hidden heroes revealed. Like if you believe the quietest person in the room might be the one holding it all together. Comment, have you ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea who you really were?